Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where my awesome co-host, epic fantasy author Richard H. Stevens, and I speak with people from all walks of the publishing industry. Lurking for Legends is a live interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or simply make comments on what you hear in the show. So tonight we have historical fiction author Margaret Pinard. Welcome, Margaret. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm earlier than you, so I'm about as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed because I'm an early morning riser. So it's working out in my favor.
That's fantastic here because historical fiction, we have not had an author who, besides me, obviously, who writes historical fiction. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you write.
Well, hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm finally getting to speak with these two in person, which is fabulous because it's been like a long process. They have a long queue, if you didn't know, if people want to bang down their doors. I am a historical fiction writer. I write primarily 19th century, although I'm branching into the beginning of the 20th. I have written primarily in UK settings because I'm obsessed with Scotland. That's a theme you'll see. I've got 5 books out. One is historical mystery, one is YA historical, and the other 3 are a series that is about immigrant stories, and Canada is in there, Richard. So I enjoy trotting the globe. I enjoy doing research through travel and picking through archives online. You know, that's my jam. And yeah, I've been doing that for about 9 years now in Portland, Oregon, after, first decade of work experience, sort of trotting here and there, Washington, D.C., Istanbul, Turkey, all over. And really like being here in Portland. It's got some great literary community, and yeah, historical fiction is what I love to read. So that's definitely what I wanted to dive into and write for other people to read as well.
So you said that you mostly write in the UK and that you really like Scotland and things like that. So tell us how you decided to, how you chose the UK, first of all, and why Scotland?
Oh, okay. Well, what calls to you in terms of an interesting subject? The first book that I wrote was historical mystery. And so I already had the sort of archetypal image of the, sort of like an Arthur Conan Doyle mystery, right? And so there's gentlemen, and there's sleuths, and there's railroad timetables, and a plot on the continent kind of thing. And so that's just sort of what I dove into. And then when I got into the weeds and started thinking, well, if I wanted to be more strong in the subject matter instead of based on plot, what would I choose to land on? And more and more as I got through book to book to book, it was how episodes in the past really reflect what we have happening on the ground right now. And so I tried to pick up a time for the series that was not as well trod by other authors. And so 1820s, 1830s, I saw an article about a tax cut that was being enforced in the UK, and how this after-war economic policy destroyed an industry on the west coast of Scotland. And I thought, oh, okay, I've heard about the clearances. I've definitely read Outlander. I love this area because I visited and traveled there. But now this is a new setting. This is a new time period for me. And it's also got all those threads woven in because it's still the same people. It's still the same class war. It's still the same economic forces of industrialization. And so there was all these layers that I could see melding together. And so that's where I started. And then just the ball started rolling. So
it's hard not to continue, right? Because that ball rolls, especially with the research. I swear, Richard, I'll stop hogging Margaret in a second.
But no worries. She's a mute button going on and off. It's funny.
I can't help it. You mentioned that you saw an article, and that's actually what sort of started the ball rolling for you. And I think that that's so fantastic because I flip through these kinds of Victorian newspapers, for example, all the time online, and you get so much interesting information. It can be tiny details. It can be huge things nobody knows about or nobody remembers. It really is inspiring. So I'm glad to hear that someone else is doing that as well.
Yeah, it's just like one little thing, and then all of a sudden your mind starts going, but what if that interacted with this, and how would that affect the family? And then, your mind just starts going. It's great.
So since you love Scotland, to write about Scotland, have you actually been to Scotland yet?
Yes. I think once as a child with my family, and then 4 times as an adult.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've definitely gone back on my own, under my own steam. And at one point I actually wanted to be like a tour guide and be someone who translates for tour groups. And so with that sort of background and mindset, I was planning, I was renting a car, I was mapping it out. I was, getting to some places on the right day because it was the last day when they would do this specific type of folk life demonstration of how they walked cloth. This is the planning level that I get into. So yeah. But the last trip was 2018, and it was pretty amazing. I went with my mom and we had a grand old time. But I also I go with a reading journal each time I return, and came back stuffed with details, stuffed with my luggage stuffed with books, because when you go to those gift shops of museums, like there's books you've never seen before. So yeah, all those details. I was like greedy.
So my wife's Scottish. We've been there a couple times already, and I can say as a translator, you'd probably have to translate Scottish into English in some parts of Scotland because of the brogue and everything else. Is just, as someone from Canada, their accent is so heavy that it's hard to make out what they're saying, and they use different words and stuff. So yeah, it's certainly it's a beautiful country.
Music to my ears, Richard.
No, it's awesome. I really enjoyed it. I even drove there. That is okay. I drove when I was there, not from Canada.
Gotcha.
There is not a curb in Scotland that I did not hit with the rims of my tires.
I know what you're talking about. I know.
This wide, and everybody drives about 100 miles an hour, and I go, wow.
Yeah, totally.
So with regards to that, obviously you get a lot of the feel from Scotland because you've been there many times, which is great. But as a fantasy writer, I can pretty much write anything I want. But you write historical fiction, so there's some pretty high standards that you and Christy will have to set for yourself in order to keep a knowledgeable audience from calling you out on different facts. And I'm sure there's probably times where you guys have been bang on with what you're writing, and people who are maybe not as knowledgeable have called you out as well. But how do you go about researching your books? I know you said you delve into online. You touched on that, and Christy was saying how she looks through different journals and stuff like that. What else do you do to research what you're doing?
I like how CJ has said, those curbs. Yeah. Well, I did a video about this. So one of the things I forgot to say is that I'm a booktuber as well. So I have a channel, and I did a pretty in-depth research video about how I accumulate knowledge on the road through trips. And it's the books, it's the museums, it's the plaques, it's the things on the side of the road that tell you what happened. The last couple of days I've been looking into printing materials because, like I said, I'm creeping into early 20th century and late 19th, early 20th century, and also to the US. So there's a lot of Chicago research going on. And one of the things I was looking up is the printer's trade. And there's actually all these names that you don't know what they mean unless you're in the trade. And that's what I want to just sort of fling out there. So establish credibility and then move on, because I don't understand how presses work. I don't do letterpress printing. It's very cool, but I don't want to have to learn all of that just to be able to explain it, And so sprinkling real life things that are still active, and you have that chance to observe someone giving a class online about how this thing was used 100 years ago is pretty fantastic. But actually there was a panel, Jolabokaflod PDX, the book festival in December, where I met JD actually, who introduced me to Christy, JD Estrada. We had a historical fiction / fantasy sci-fi panel. and we had 3 of us, and we talked about how the world building and the issues were different, but how they were also very similar, like eerily similar, because when you are world building for something you make up, you have mile markers, you have sort of, well, if it's going to work, it has to have these things. You are still using real world logic to construct your system, whether it's magic or, you know, alien life forms. And so we had a really good talk about that. It was really cool.
What's probably the hardest bit of research you've had to do? Sometimes it's teeny weeny details. Sometimes it's bigger things than, you know, a person would think. But, you know, I know that you said something about writing in the 1820s because not as many people had written about that time. And that's good because, you know, fewer people have done it. And also it can be more difficult for sure.
Right. Yeah. Then you find out why no one's written in that time.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, if only I'd known. Yeah, you put your finger right on it. And JD's here. He came in right after, or right when I said his name, I guess. Yeah. Hardest piece of research. Well, there's 2 different types that jump to mind. The first one is the thing that needed to be like the water that the characters swim in, which is religion and state religion, and the fact that that was just such a dividing line in society at that time, and how it's just not at all like it is now, for me at least. And so having to learn when the church split, like the 5,670th time in the UK by that time, and where they were identified with and who that meant they were aligned with, that sort of political religious stuff was very detailed and sort of hard to grasp from my point of view. And I had so many charts. The other hard piece that I was trying to chase down recently actually is refrigeration. And I'm sure this exists. I'm just having trouble finding it lately. So one of the things I obsess over when I don't need to really is like what the inside of a house will look like, so that people have a good sense of where characters are moving and how the place looks, right? And so it's like, how are they taking their meals? There are no refrigerators here. Like, how are they storing something, and when do they have to go out to cook? Because that's an everyday thing, and I'm not confident. So every time I say something about that in this person's daily life, I'm like, oh, I might have to change that later because I don't know this fact. So that's the research right cycle, all right? And so I haven't found that detail yet, so it just keeps being pinned in the side, which is kind of frustrating.
So that being said, what is the strangest thing you researched?
Strangest?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, here's something that is a detail that is just at the beginning that many people will not even remember. So that tax cut that I was talking about that started at the beginning of The Keening, 2015 book. So it's on the coast, and the reason it took down a whole economy was because they were using a chemical dye from Spain that could also be manufactured with seaweed. It was like an iodine thing that you would have to burn at a specific temperature till you got the ash, and then you could make a slurry of the ash until you had this chemical process that was used in the early industry in the UK. And so I am not a chemist. And so trying to figure out how people in rural islands did this and how specific they had to be and why was really interesting, because the part that I don't get and don't really think readers need to get is the how long it had to burn and how the top fitted into the well that they would dig into the ground. But what I did think was interesting was that it was so important to have quality control. Even though it wasn't like 1950s guy with a clipboard, it was the only way that those people were going to get cash to pay their rent for the year. And so it was like everyone's focused on this pit in the earth and monitoring how it's burning, making sure there aren't pebbles getting thrown in, making sure it's all as uniform as can be so that they get the best price when they bring it to market. And it's these small things that enable them to live, that once you get one thing out of balance, like it creates all the tension you're off.
That's awesome. That's very interesting.
That was pretty strange. The potash.
And
So
those
your
are the
friend
tiny
Katie is
details.
seeing your fridge and Swiss Family Robinson. There's your research novel right there.
Oh my God.
Sometimes we research these teeny weeny details and then find out that we didn't really need it all. Did you ever have a time like that where you've done a lot of research into something and then, you're sort of like, readers don't really need to know this though. And then I feel like I've wasted time. I can't ever say that I feel like I've wasted time because everything is helpful in one way or another, right? But
right
here and there are those things where you're like, nobody needs to know this but me. It's really just me.
I can't think of it offhand. I mean, I did a lot of work trying to cut down to figure out what the time frame was for the work in progress right now. And so I had it stretching from like 1890s to 1916 to like World War I. And I'm like, no, I don't need to put in all this stuff about World War I and the race riots and Indiana and Black Wall Street. Like, that's very interesting, but it's got to be in a different book. So yeah, you're right. It's not wasted. It's stored there. It's fascinating stuff, but it doesn't belong in the same book. It's not a fantasy book. I don't get 700 pages.
Yeah.
It must be difficult for you people who write history or historical fiction to include certain things and not include certain things, because there's so many things that go on in the world all the time. And, and a lot of it is relevant and game changing to the world at that time. But if you just kept veering off on a tangent going on about, the Great Depression in the 20s, now like you wouldn't write your book anymore. It'd now be about something totally different. So it must be quite a balancing act for historical fiction writers to not let them take over your story.
Right. I mean, that's the info dump argument, right? Like
yes,
that's
exactly.
You can figure out what your readers like, how much of it, and sort of how much you want to put in, and then how much you think the audience will bear. Because I'm sure Christy and I'd be like, here, shut up, all these interesting facts at your face. But yeah. Actually, I remember doing a lot of research on money because you have to get up on your shillings, and that's probably something you had to find too, and like realize how the system even works. It's like in markers of 16 and then 20, and then it's kind of ridiculous. But I mean, what English system of counting is not. So yeah, that doesn't make it in really.
I think research is kind of like an iceberg. You research so much stuff, and you only share just the tip of the iceberg. But if you didn't have that base of knowledge below you, like your book wouldn't float, because you see your book and you write it well from what you've learned. So I think it adds a lot of richness and depth to the book, even though you don't actually go out and tell all about the Great Depression or whatever those side stories are.
For sure. Yeah.
Has a big impact. All of it has a big impact. Anita Stewart is saying down there, the readers may not need to know, but I do as an author, or it bugs me. And that is also true. Like, we can go down those research rabbit holes and have a great time, and maybe it'll apply to another book, and maybe it won't, but I have no regrets. I'm never going to have a regret about that.
Yeah.
Let the readers fill in the gaps to a degree as well. So, your readers are probably very knowledgeable in what time period you're writing in. So you probably don't need to fill them in and all this stuff anyway. They already know. So that's a good point.
That'll also bring you into the quagmire of dialect, though. And being in like rural Western Scotland, you're going to have a different
for sure.
twang to reproduce. And so, like, how much do you educate people within text, and how much do you just like make it modern so that people understand what you're giving them without like a lecture? So yeah,
I feel like that's the case almost no matter what time period you're writing in. And naturally you've seen this, that there are a lot of phrases that seem like they would be modern phrases, and someone would probably say to you, that's modern, you can't use that, but actually no, it comes from back then.
Yeah. I can't remember if we talked about this over Twitter or something, but there's the not the Wayback Machine, that's the web pages. What's the Google View N View? Do you know what I'm talking about? There's this thing where Google will show you, out of all the printed material that they've scanned, how many times a word or a phrase shows up in like history, because Google has scanned all of history basically. And so it's a great way for historical writers to see if something was like creeping in the area that they're writing in, or whether it wasn't really in the parlance until like 50 years later. And in that case, you're like, I probably can't get away with it. Yeah.
Yeah, those kinds of things are like, again, the small details that would surprise people, and you have to decide, do I write something that people will believe, or do I write the truth that nobody's going to believe, you know? And then there are those sort of popularized facts that aren't really facts. I'm sure you've run into those too, like those things that everybody believes to be true and they're not. And then you're like, which way do I go? Do I go the way people know it, or do I go the actual correct way where people are going to argue with me?
Do you buck the trend, right? Yeah. Like, I don't know who's responsible, if it's Georgette Heyer for all the, like the Regency nonsenses, or someone else, or like Victorian things. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions that you would have to do a lot of work to have people trust you as a writer before you change their mind. Yeah. Interesting. Do you have one of those? Do you have like a pet one that's in Victorian that you're like, God, if only people...
You know, I run across them just like, you know, in general. Sometimes things with marriage ages and things like that aren't quite what they're made out to be, you know, in popularized dramas and stuff like that. Sometimes it's older or it's younger, you know, sometimes it is older. And, you know, it's just been popularized one way or another. And then you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to get stuck sticking with that. Otherwise, nobody's going to believe what I'm saying. Yeah. Even though I have the proof.
Right?
It's right,
I have receipts.
Yeah.
Yes. Hey, Joe. Yes.
That's cool. So that kind of piqued my interest. We had quite the conversation on corsets, right, Margaret? What's that all about?
Yes. So I did a live a few weeks ago on a Friday, and I had two other booktubers join me, Katya and Tina, and they were, I think they had both seen Bernadette Banner before, and we were talking about the tag that I had just done, which is what YouTube channels besides booktube channels do you follow? And the one that I had talked about the most was Bernadette Banner, who is a historical costumer. And she specializes in 1890s to 1910s era. And so one of her bugaboos is that corsets are not evil. And so we were talking about this, and Bridgerton may have come in as well. And Joe was on, and he commented like, what? I thought corsets, and we were like off to the races. He didn't know what hit him. So we had an extensive discussion. It was really fun.
Speaking of tags, I know we have a question down there from Derek. He's saying, didn't the Victorian era just make up random history bits? Pretty sure they made up a lot of stuff. Go ahead, Margaret.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I love, let's see, arts and crafts. I have various sort of movements here on the bookcase next to me. But they were great at theorizing where they came from and scientific origins, as well as making up stuff that supported their arguments for like return to nature and being romantic. So the romantic movement harkened back to, they don't know what it harkened back to because they didn't know the fossil record. Anyway, so they did make up a lot of stuff. I'm trying to think of like examples. The problem is that we still sort of persist with these misconceptions of like the Middle Ages having nothing happen, or yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting era.
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's you have to watch, like, even when you research in the era, you do have to watch like what the source is and compare it to modern knowledge and all kinds of stuff. You know, it's not just going through magazines and having a great time, which it is that. It's not just that. You have to definitely compare, because there are a lot of, you know, mistakes and things they just didn't know at the time, or things they thought they knew, and stuff like that, that if you wrote it now would not be so great.
Right. Medical science, right?
Oh, quackery. Oh boy. That's its own live stream, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
I didn't have to do too much of that. I did. Yeah. See, I'm very good at like selective memory stuff. I know one of my characters in Grasping Root, who I did more of a deep dive in, he was studying to be a doctor, and like, where were the schools for that? He had to go back to Europe and then come back to Canada. and like, what did they know about science? What would he have been studying? What could he write in his letter? And like, that is one letter in one paragraph of the whole book. And it was just like a rabbit hole that I didn't even want to go down because medical quackery, just like, no. But,
yeah, it is true. I mean, you just don't know what you're reading in a historical fiction book, how long this paragraph took to actually research. It's a long time.
Yeah.
So the title, The Grasping Root, that's kind of an interesting title. And I see it looks like a tree that's reaching into the ground there. What's the significance of that? Without trying to spoil the book for people.
Ooh,
that's it.
Hello, Glare. Yeah.
No, yeah.
So this is book 2. A spoiler for anyone who hasn't read book 1. I will just say it's an immigration story. So they're leaving Scotland and they come to Canada. And in Canada, the whole goal of this family is to put down roots and find a way to stay and survive and thrive rather than disintegrate and be scattered to the four winds. And so this is the title that I came up with and got a very appropriate cover to match. But yeah, Nova Scotia and the hills around Pictou and New Glasgow. And I actually visited there for a few days when I was living in DC, and it was gorgeous. So I thought, yes, I have to stay here more. I have to live here in my mind. Yeah.
So what time frame would that be when they actually leave Scotland and come to Canada?
1823.
Interesting.
Early wave, yeah.
So Canada's not even a country yet.
Correct. It's an empire. But Nova Scotia is its own colony.
Right.
That was an interesting one to try to get straight, because that was one of those like, okay, I know what it is now, but like all the, oh, we're separate, we're together, we're part of you, no, now we're our own, and Newfoundland is doing its own thing, and like all that was
Upper Canada's down here and Lower Canada's up there. Yes.
Geography, totally. Yeah, the rebellion of 1837. I tried to work that in, but the timeline just did not work, and I had to give it up. So there's a whole bunch of research that I just had to abandon.
Yeah, you're better off for knowing it, because that'll make your books richer, because you've got that knowledge in the background. So that's awesome. But that sounds like a lot of work, all that research you guys got to do. I like to stick to fantasy. If I want to write a purple sky, I got a purple sky, and that's it.
I like it.
True. So tell us a little bit more about your YouTube channel. Tell us where, how we can find it. I don't know if you have a youtube.com/ and then you have your name or what it is, but
yes.
Okay, perfect.
Margaret Pinard. I mean, it's very easy. Yeah. The channel name is Margaret Pinard, and the little C/user is Margaret Pinard. So that'll definitely get you to me.
Great.
And I started last August, so I'm really like a little baby booktuber and didn't know much about the culture going in, and have found an amazing community. So like, a lot has gone wrong with this pandemic, and it's a terrible situation, but in terms of shifting gears in my life and enabling like a timeout and a refocusing, it's been fantastic for me. So, uncertainty is one of those things that's hard to manage, but, count it as a blessing, because it's good time for writing. It's good time for making connections with people. And it's sort of enabled more of this digital communication and, knock down a few gatekeepers, which I am a fan of. So, yeah.
How about March of the Moderns you did last month? Tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I definitely was like, sign me up, was Victober. That is Katie at Books and Things, a project, and along with Lucy the Reader and Kate Howe, maybe? Anyway, there's 3, but I think Katie is the original. And it's reading Victorian books, so books published in the Victorian period, even if they're not necessarily British, during the month of October. And I love this because I can't get enough of these books, first of all. And then I wanted to continue. I wanted it to continue. And it's just basically a way for people to read a similar thing. It's almost like a class in college where you're all concentrating on the same subject and coming up against the same things, and just inspired to have discussion about those themes and do fun, random crap together. So we're doing like They had a choose your own adventure. Like they had really creative things. And I was like, I want to do something like this. So March of the Moderns had a bunch of buddy reads that we did together. And those were, those produced live chats. So we had live streams for those. We had a bingo board where people were trying to match prompts with the books that they read that were trying to diversify their reading for the period of the modern writers, which is after Victoria died, 1901 to the end of World War II, which is sort of my arbitrary period. And so that was the second thing, the bingo board. And there was a third like pillar of the stool, and I'm not remembering right now because, you know, as soon as it's done, it's just like washed. But it was super fun. I made lots of like good connections with people and talked about things like I haven't since college, really, like that really trusting environment to talk about deeper themes and yeah, especially things as they relate to today and privilege and sexism and, you know, like all these things that we all need to talk about. So it was good.
That's really cool. And I know that there's that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, but the one that I don't know how to pronounce.
Oh, December. Well,
please, yeah.
JD here. JD can say it, right?
Yeah. I heard you say it. I was like, I'm going to say it, and then I forgot how to say
Say
it.
that again?
Jolabokaflod.
That's it. I was looking right at it. I was going to
ask all the same sound. Yeah. Well, it's two sounds, O and but Jolabokaflod, and it means Yule book flood. And it's the Icelandic tradition of giving books for Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, sorry, and then going home to read them with hot chocolate all night. And I was like, this is my holiday. So 2018 is when I had that idea to create an indie book festival because we had Wordstock, and it's now called the Portland Book Festival. But it was getting bigger and bigger every year and more expensive and more exclusive. And so now it's a huge thing and they get big, huge names to come. I mean, virtually now, but there was no counterpart for indie authors that had, you know, maybe $50 for a table, not like 600. Right. So that's why I wanted to have this gathering. So it was for indie authors. It was to connect with readers. It was basically just trying to keep that avenue for a wider audience open. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then when we went virtual for the 2020 edition, we did it all on YouTube through StreamYard. And instead of just having a virtual table, which I didn't find too compelling or think anyone was going to buy a book for, we had them turn into talks. And so it was like authors who wanted to talk about a specific subject. And that was kind of like a writing conference. Like, here's the talk I want to give. And they would submit an application for that. And then Elle Mitchell and I, my writing partner, my Yola partner, we tried to get as many people as many diverse genre and age and background or whatever, but mainly the Northwest region to try to make it feel like a community in that way. And it was fantastic. JD's in Atlanta, but he was on my panel, so we did okay. People were slotted in as stars from the outside of Northwest region, and that worked fine. It was good.
So going along with that, also I saw in that same post on your website something called Crowdcast. What is Crowdcast? The word jumped out at me. Oh yeah,
that shouldn't be on there. That's what we thought we might use originally. Yeah, it's just not as easy as StreamYard. It's something that has
okay. It's a
model.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I saw, and I can't remember where I saw this. It may have been one of your YouTube thumbnails, but I thought that I saw like a nice closet full of historical dress. Am I right?
Yes. So, yes. Gosh, there's so many directions I can take this.
Take them all.
Well, okay, so I was in Washington, D.C. I was working for a nonprofit, and I was not happy because I was seeing the soullessness of like corporate America / nonprofit America, really, and in D.C., which you can imagine is pretty holeful. And I wanted to get out, and I needed to get out for my mental health, and I moved west and bedded in with a friend outside Portland and was like, I need to do something different. And I worked at local businesses so that I could have a part-time work schedule while I started off this writing career. And I have worked at 6 different local businesses, 5 of which have closed, unfortunately. Independent businesses really not getting the nice end of the stick here. But one of them, and one of the saddest, was Helen's Pacific Costumers, because this is a place that I went to see if I could get a Jane Austen Regency dress for like going to a picnic. And I went once and really like made friends with the person who was working there. And they needed help because they were closing. And I thought, yes. So I just worked there for like 6 to 8 weeks, and the people were amazing. And this place had been open for over 100 years. It had just so many layers and eras and qualities and, history of costumes. It had been a woman-owned business since like 1890s or 1908 or like somewhere around there. And so they had closed from back then. Anyway, so from being a costume fan to actually working and sort of getting to know more of like the taxonomy of like clothing from different eras and stuff, it was almost like having a class in college when you were a theater major in costumes, and you're like, yes. So I got to, get a lot of those at discount prices because they were closing. And we were talking a little bit before we went live about the term history bounding, which is like taking 1 or 2 pieces of something and mixing it in, layering it in with modern clothing, because you don't always want to go around like what's his face in England, Taylor, Matthew, I can't remember his name, but yeah. So costumes, I wear them to launch events usually, and book fairs, and sometimes going out for a fancy night out.
Do you stick to your own specific time period, or are you just like, I just love wearing whatever?
No, because one of the other things about the 1820s and 30s being like a less known period is like no one knows what they wore then. It's just sort of this awkward period of not Regency dresses that are high-waisted and like diaphanous, and not belle dresses from the Civil War era, and people are just like, I don't know, shoulders. So it's very wishy-washy in terms of identifying. So you really have to have studied the fashion plates and really delved to really be able to recognize it. Yeah. So I didn't have anything for my period, which is why I had to sort of scrap things together from later in the Victorian period versus like a peasant blouse looking thing, and then put plaids over all of it because that's what they had in Scotland.
Everything's plaid in Scotland.
Yes.
So
That's fun.
Going forward, I see you've got 3 books that are in a series. Are you going to be adding on to that series? And do the standalone books have anything to do with that series in any kind of way?
Great question. I thought the series was going to be longer, and then I may return to it at some point, but for the moment, I'm on to 1893 in Chicago, and so I sort of closed off and thought 3 is like a respectable amount for a series, and yeah. So I'm on to another. I don't know if it'll be a saga, and so far it's just a standalone. But yes, my MacLeans in Nova Scotia and Scotland are on their fictional universe. They've been farewelled. The other 2 standalones are not related except in terms of setting. So a piece of my first book, Memories Hostage, takes place in Aberdeen, which is on the northeast coast of Scotland, but that's not in the other books. It's just close. And then Dulcie's Legacy, which is the young adult book, which happens in Nova Scotia, in Cape Breton. I couldn't work Cape Breton into the emigrants. So she got her own special place, but also just adjacent. And what drew me to this spot is the mix of the French settlers that were still there, the Scottish immigrants that were coming in, and the natives that were living side by side, but completely segregated, but not really. And so that's why like some of this came up, and then it came up later for the series. So there are some of the issues that definitely crop up in both, but they're not related at all in terms of characters. Yeah.
So what drew you to this more towards like the late 1800s, early 1900s? Was it that you came up with a story that suited more there, or that it was something about the period and you suited a story to it?
The fashion, darling. No.
I get it.
Yeah, I know. No, actually, so I had a much wider time frame, as I was saying, and the reason I sort of narrowed down onto 1893 was more because of a family story. So during the pandemic, I've been going down and helping my parents declutter the house I grew up in and sort of try to get their ish together. And some of the things I went through had to do with family history. And my dad's been pretty active in trying to record family history and whatnot. And he was telling me a story about his grandmother talking about her uncle, I believe, although I have it written down, it's just not in here. And the story was about a family member who remembered going through the Panic of 1893, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is, for those of you who don't know, like I didn't a year ago, that's like just north of Chicago. That this family had tried sending the husband out to barber in a nearby town. He got, 50 cents or something and sent back a sack of onions, potatoes. There's like the amount of desperation and destitution and resourcefulness and that sort of thing. That's what I was using for profiles of my Scottish immigrants, and to hear about that in a family story and a time period that I was interested in but didn't know much about, in a place that I didn't know anything about either. I was like, ooh, yes. So that's why I sort of switched it up to there. And then a World's Fair is just like too shiny to ignore. So that's what I'm basing it, anchoring it in. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Derek is saying, does that mean we're getting a fashion show tonight?
No. No.
JD's asking a couple of questions here. Says, if you ever release a Pinard book set in a specialty case, I'm not sure what that means. What would you put in an engraving?
A specialty case. You're going to have to explain that.
Maybe like a leather type of thing? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, is he referencing like the printer tools thing I was talking about earlier? Because I'm just learning about type cases and, shutting them up before you put them in the whatever. Yeah. See, I haven't absorbed the lingo yet. It's all in my notes.
I thought maybe something you guys shared together. And he's also asking, have you ever sung at a book event? Obviously you have then, if he's asking that.
Oh, I don't know. Does he know? I don't think I have a public version of it. I have a clip of it on my Google Drive, but I don't think I've put it on live. I've definitely sung in videos. So that's probably what he's asking about. But yeah, actually for Stormrack and Spindrift, the last book, this came out right before we all shut down in November of 2019. And it's 1833, so it jumps a few years. And I did a fair amount of research into music. I was with a Gallic study group to learn the language for about 4 years before finally giving it up. But it started out as like something to familiarize myself with the place names and the sort of rhythm of the language for the books. And then became, this is really fun. These people are really awesome. Like, hey, but then you get pulled into all the creative record that exists around those things. So like I said, the plaid, you can get into the plaid, you can get into the song history from this time. And I actually did a mix of the spirit of the time and the actual time to do the songs. I did like a folk song, and then I had a friend who is a musician play guitar to a labor song that we sang together that was like, eat the rich, basically. So it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of creative license doing these events, which I miss. But you know, if you get a good sound stage, I suppose you could still do it.
That's awesome.
That's fun. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting near the end of the show here. So we just like to, Christy and I would like to thank you for being with us and sharing your stories and what you do to get to your stories. The research is really interesting to me, listening to you talk about that. So thank you for being with us this week. And Christy and I wish you the best of luck going forward. And definitely keep in touch. I know you've got Christy on your Instagram and other social media, so we'll know what's going on with Margaret Pinard when she comes to the new book. Do you have a date set for your new book to come out?
No, actually, one of those big life turnarounds is like, I think I'm going to be querying, so like attempting to do hybrid. So it's going to be a new adventure. So it's a long way off.
Maybe we'll have you back on once you when you're successful with that, and you can let us know how that turned out. That'd be perfect.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much, guys. Big pleasure.
So, Christy, is there anything new in the world of Christy Stratos this week?
There is nothing new here. I have been doing as much as I can in terms of writing. Talking about turnarounds, I write historical fiction now. I'm writing something that's more futuristic, more of a nanopunk type of thing. So it's been a lot of fun to write something so utterly different from what I usually write. And I don't have any dates set either or anything like that, but that's what I've been working on. I do have my next idea for my next Victorian short story, but again, I'm going to need a little bit of time for that. So yeah, my latest release is The Artist, which is historical suspense. And I'm sure I'll have more news coming soon about when I'll be releasing other things.
Awesome. And nothing going on with me. I just mired in the edit of book 1 of Highcliffe Guardians, and I'm about 40,000 words into the book after that. So that's all that's going on with me. But on Friday evening this week at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Christy and I will be doing a co-live read excerpt from one of my previous books, Rika's Gift. It's book 2 of my Legends of Lurker trilogy, and we'll also be teaming up to live read. You haven't told me yet what we're live reading. So
me? No. No, we're doing the Rika stuff. What do you mean?
Oh, we're not reading anything from yours?
I don't think so, but I mean, I'll think about it.
Okay, so that's good for that. So if anyone wants to do a live read on Friday, you might not know, you probably don't know Margaret is. I use every Friday night. I take about an hour time, about 7 o'clock at night, and I just read what I wrote that week. And it's just another way for me to edit, and people show up and they like listening to the story or whatever. But now we do co-live reads once in a while. I've done one with Christy already. I've got another author who's interested in probably doing it next week, and Christy and I are going to do it this Friday. So if you ever want to do that, just let me know, and we'll have you on there. And we both read from the story, where you can be the narrator, and then we act out the characters. It's just a lot of fun, and it's not like we have a huge audience or anything. So it's almost like you and I are doing it together, and that's it. So it's not a big deal, but it's a lot of fun. And
the nervous system doesn't know that.
It's certainly no worse than this. So, and going forward, we have exciting few weeks coming up on Lurking for Legends. Next Tuesday, we have a special guest, multi-talented Mikhail Roberts. Mikhail is an American-raised actor, American actor who's raised in Japan, and he's got a BFA. I don't know what that is. We'll have to ask him. And acting from CCM at the University of Cincinnati. He's a star of the films The Monster Mind, Saki the Killer, and Opus. He's also the star lead in the soon-to-be-released And I Feel Fine. So he's an actor. He's a voice actor. And Mikhail is also the narrator of the epic fantasy series Soul Forge by Richard H. Stevens, which is my very first series. And he's also a narrator of Light and Dark by D.M. Fife. And he'll soon be narrating my Bainbridge Companion novel box set once he's done with the book that he's working on now. So I'm looking forward to that. On April 27th, we speak with author and cover designer Nicole Conway. And I can't wait to pick her brain about what constitutes a good cover. And then the following week, we have the reader panel that we're talking about, Margaret. And we're hosting it as the very first one. And for this panel, we'll be assembling 4 readers from 4 different genres and have authors ask the readers questions about what they like, what are the pet peeves, etc. So that should be very interesting to listen to the actual readers' answers. So again, thank you, Margaret, for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure. And for Christy Stratus and I, we wish everyone a safe and happy week ahead. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.